Wait for them all to come in.
And did you make me the co-host yet?
I can do that.
That's great, thanks. And we're recording, so if you want to stop the recording and re-record.
That's fine.
Okay. There we go. No breakout rooms yet, no. So
they're all in the oh, nothing happening. Middle. Okay. There we go.
and
There's everybody.
David, I still don't think I'm a co-host yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll take care of that.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, here we go.
Welcome.
There you are.
Hmm.
And here, scan and see all the beautiful faces. Wonderful. Well, I bring you greetings from Amsterdam. So that's where I'm calling from this evening. And it's just wonderful to be here. We decided for this particular BCE to, the first four have been sort of on the more appreciative side of readiness and the kind of things that are aspirational about readiness. And I thought, just to kind of balance it out a bit, we talk a bit about some of the things that make readiness more difficult and how to manage that in our practice. So we just love, I see a lot of new faces. So if you'd be happy to just drop a word or two about yourself in the chat box, maybe where you're from or how you're feeling or what you're afraid of. And this is a way to bring all the voices into the room. And Karen's our host this evening, and Karen will be the queen of the chat box, and so she'll keep track of all the things that are happening there.
Queen for a day.
I didn't know that, Tom.
Oh, very good.
Sort of.
Curious, tired. A couple others are tired. And welcome, Francis. Pretty glad you're here.
Yeah.
Liam, thank you for noticing that there's too many words to describe fear.
Too many options.
Too many. We don't have that long.
No.
Virginia, 5 a.m. Wow, you get extra bonus points.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to get up that early for this. So.
All right. Rosalinda, it's good to see you again. Yeah. All right. So if maybe you're still formulating your thoughts, you're always welcome to put things in the chat box as we go along. And yeah, so I wanted just to share before I put up the slides, sort of a humorous story about what we're going to cover for this evening about readiness. And it speaks to, in some ways, one of the reasons I decided pretty early on in creating narrative coaching was to the fact that I didn't find goals as prominent or useful for people as is often touted. And I was trying to figure out how, within narrative coaching, to support people to achieve what they were after without having to use a more traditional role of goals. And as part of that, I started to realize that part of my discomfort with goals is it often places what we want in the future. In between now and the future, there's all kinds of opportunities for fear to creep in. And I started to begin to think about, like from a Buddhist perspective in some ways, that there is no fear in the present moment, that most of our fear is because of things we're afraid is going to happen later, or because it reminds us of something that made us afraid in the past. And so if somebody's trying to imagine even a positive goal that's somewhere later, there's all kinds of reasons for them to build up fears about that. Well, I tried that before and it never worked, or I don't have the support I need, or I don't have the money I need, or I can't do that, or it's going to be too hard, or all the kind of things that come up for many of us when we think about goals in the future. So part of the reason why we focus on experiences and experiments in the present is because we can bump into the fears sooner rather than later, do so with support of the coach. Yeah. And we can do things in more bite-sized pieces, which are less likely to activate big fears. And I had a really, one of those anecdotes from my past that really reminded me of this. I was sharing this with Karen many, many moons ago. I was having dinner with some, three sets of friends and at one of the houses, and they had a young son who's probably 2 or 3 years old. And he got bored with all the adults at the table. So he's running around eventually in the room and off to behind us. And at one point fell down. And it was really fascinating what he did after that, because we could sort of see, yeah, he's probably going to have a little mark, and yeah, it was a bit uncomfortable, but probably okay. Anyways, the first thing he did was before he had any real reaction, he looked at us to see what we thought about what happened. And we all agreed that he was fine. And we said, "Oh, I'm so sorry you fell down, but it looks like you're okay." He goes, "Oh," and he just got up and ran off again. And I contrast that with sometimes when we overreact to something before we really have any information, and the child panics. Oh my gosh, the adults are concerned. I better be afraid because something really bad's just happened. And I started to think about this sort of like, this nature of fear is often, sometimes there's legitimate reasons to be afraid, and those we need to address, but oftentimes we're afraid because of how others are reacting, or because of what stories are being activated in our own minds. And so part of this whole piece for readiness today is to be able to think about what is the fear that's present for our client as we're talking to them. And how do we use the spiral in the model, which we'll show you in a little bit, to kind of gauge how can we help them address the fear in a way that's manageable for them right now, that helps them find ways to address the fear before they move forward. Because in many ways, they're looking at us, say if we're their coach. Should I be afraid? The coach doesn't seem very afraid. Maybe I'm more able to handle this than I thought. If we're like, oh, we're secretly, and we think we're hiding this from the client. Oh, yes. But inside we're going, my God, that's really difficult, or that's really awful. And we catastrophize it with them, or we would be anxious in that situation. It often starts to permeate the conversation. So we're going to talk a bit about how do we help people kind of work with their fear. If there's anything that you particularly would like to know about fear, or any fear you have this evening or today that's on your mind that you'd like to bring into the room, just feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll see what we can do to weave it into our conversation. Okay? All good? All right. So I'm going to pull up the slides and share a few things, and then we have a practice for you coming up in a little bit. Yeah, so here we are. Here's the start of our piece. So just some markers. So this is we're doing an entire year of theme on readiness, and so all the rest of them will be that as well. Today's focus is on the role of fear, and the questions are, where is the fear and what does it need? So like everything in narrative coaching, we treat fear as a character. If it's present as a character in the story. And like all significant characters in our client stories, we're just really curious about what's this character doing here, and what does it need, and what is it asking of us? Okay. And I just thought this was a beautiful way to start our conversation about fear. And so one of the ways I think about this is that when I used to teach feedback skills to managers and leaders, how to give feedback to others, one of the things we talked a lot about, and this is where the phrase I use often about the loving mirror comes in, that when you're trying to support someone to see something about themselves or their behavior or their impact that they're not seeing maybe as well as that we would like them to do, one of the things we're gauging is how close can I hold the mirror? And sometimes I observe that because a lot of leaders and managers felt anxious about giving feedback, they would often just blurt stuff out as one of the things that would, and so it'd be like, shoving the mirror in somebody's face. But it's hard for most of us to take that. And so, but if we hold it too back and we try to be too vague or too gentle or too, we wander around and we miss the point, and the mirror is so far away they don't see anything. So part of it is kind of gauging how much of what is happening for them in terms of what is true right now can they actually see, and that's sort of a gauge for how close do we hold the mirror. And the whole sort of Goldilocks point of that is we hold it just on the edge of what's enough, with a little bit of edge to it so that they can kind of lean into something that would be important to them. And so this whole piece that we're going to do is really about how to use our breath and how to use the narrative coaching model to kind of help people engage their fear at the level of readiness that they're prepared for. So I couldn't find exactly the photo that I wanted, but I'm going to use this. So this is called rappelling, if you've ever done any rock climbing or adventure camps or things like that. The activity of rappelling is actually quite interesting and enjoyable for most people. The first step to rappel is often panicking for most people because you're often high up. And I wanted to use this as an example, just to kind of illustrate what's coming. So to sort of set the stage for this. And I thought about this in terms of some years ago, my daughter, who's now 21, loves ziplining. As I do too, because it's a way for me to deal with my fear of heights, but have fun at the same time. And some of these zip lines, especially the ones in forests, often involve landing at the top of a very tall tree stump, then having to rappel down to the forest floor. And inevitably, my daughter would always make me go first so that she could make sure it was okay. And I have to okay, I want to be the good dad and show strength, and I want to do this thing that scares me to death. It's good for me too. And so I was thinking about when you're rappelling off, so you have to make a fundamental assumption of trust in the equipment and the providers, and you look at their track record. Okay, nobody's ever died. Doesn't stop you from worrying that you might be the first one, but. And then I started thinking about when you kind of have to lean back the first time and take those first couple of steps, about how every single component of that process is something that pretty much any of us could do in our sleep. There's nothing actually dangerous about this, assuming your equipment works, which in 99.9999% of the time it does. And yet we still often are afraid. So what are we afraid of? We know how to lean back. We know how to walk backwards. We know how to hold onto a rope. We know how to listen to people giving us instructions. There's actually nothing in the process itself that's dangerous. So then why do we feel afraid? And so I use that as an example for myself of thinking about what I do to help myself enjoy this and not feel afraid all the way down and miss the whole fun of it. And so I held that in the back of my mind when I created the activity for us today. So I'm just going to check. Yeah. So before we get to that, I'm going to just stop and see if there's any insights you have about this from your own experiences with fear, assuming you have some.
I'll put Laurel's voice in here. She wrote in that if she's afraid that she'll get injured if she exercises or when she exercises.
Excellent. Excellent. So we all know how to exercise, we all know how to take care of ourselves, and yet we have these fears. And so part of this, the value of this is, again, there's legitimate occasions to fear. Like you can hurt yourself. It's possible to hurt yourself while you're exercising. So it's something to be aware of. At the same time, just thinking about trying to just hold that fear loosely and say, what is this fear actually about? And it's often not about what we think it is. So a great example. Thank you. Anything else, Karen?
Yes, there's a couple coming in. Fear of the unknown and fear of others' judgments and reactions.
Yeah.
That's from Laura and Catherine.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and the fear of the unknown one's a lot, because that's everything on the other side of a threshold is unknown. But again, we think about the humor of fear. So like there is no known, nothing is known. And yet we have this notion that we should know and that things will be better if we know, which again, sometimes it is, but oftentimes we know from living that the next minute, the next hour, the next day is unknown to us at this point in time. And yet somehow it still brings fear, even though it's how reality works. So for me, I want to just to be fair, I don't want to dismiss experiences any of us have had, including myself, have had experiences where fear was an appropriate response that needed to be dealt with in a situation, say in case of an emergency, for example. But this is more about those sort of goblin fears that kind of mess around with us at times, that often get in our way or our clients' way of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and another goblin fear, Lynn talked about not being confident in her own capabilities, such as being able to stop herself.
Yeah.
In the way that's been demonstrated. And it's really tied into Sandra's next comment about trust in self.
Yeah, yeah. So then what causes us to not trust ourselves? And I think there's some things in the practice we're going to do that might give us all some insights on that. Yeah. All right. So I want to, if it's okay, move on and sort of set up our first little piece of practice. This is a quote any of you who have studied with me would have seen, but it's an important sort of entree to our practice. Yeah. So if we tie in the comment about fear of the unknown,
and if somebody has background noise, could you mute yourself, please?
And you also can mute everybody.
Yeah, if you don't mind, folks, I'll just go ahead and do that, okay?
Just in case. Sometimes it's hard to know.
All right. Yeah.
All good.
Oh, getting ready now, David. Didn't apply.
I should be clear, everybody but me, Karen.
Well, working towards that.
When we're at a threshold or a point of choice or a decision or an action, a change we're trying to make, we're moving into unknown territory. And so one of the really generative parts of thresholds is it really helps us understand what is our fear. And on the flip side of those fears is often our secret desire. Like, for example, if I look at my fear of heights or my fear of doing something that I physically know I can do in my sleep. So what if behind that fear is a fear of like, what if I lived so bravely that I just acted with courage all the time? And there's a way of being when you move through an experience of fear and act anyways. And there's an energy and a rush that often comes with that. You think, well, the desire is like, what if I had that all the time? And so we're going to look in this activity around what is our fear and what is the attachment that we have to the world as we knew it that might be feeding our fear, because oftentimes their fear points to a new view of the world and or a new view of ourselves and others. So I'm just gonna just give us a small practice to help us get started so that we don't activate too much fear for the big practice. And I want to just draw our attention to a really human response. Like if you see something challenging happen, or you get a piece of maybe not great news, there's a very instinctive response in most of us to gasp. Like it's I can't believe this, or oh my gosh, that's just happened. And part of that, just the physiology of that is that when my sort of take on it is when we're confronted with something that is challenging, we're gasping because we want to be full of air in case we need to act. And so it's a natural response you'd see in many animals of doing what's necessary in anticipation of what might be happening. The problem is that we often end up holding our breath. And when we hold our breath, a lot of things happen which may not be very productive for us in terms of the oxygen we need to make decisions. So often there's a rush out of air if we're moving into action. So I want to just give us a little practice with this. So I'm going to invite you just to, some of you have already done this, but maybe if there's something that you are feeling some fear around right now, and or historically have had fear around, just imagine that you're holding that in your hand. Some caricature of it or symbol or the word itself, and be kind, don't make it a brick. Just make it something light, a light representation of your fear. But just imagine holding that in your hand and trusting that your hand will be able to hold this just fine. If you want support, you can put your hand on an armrest or on the table. But imagine, so I would just put the word heights in my hand, like, oh, there's a tall tree. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is just hold your breath, just for as long as you feel comfortable holding your breath, as you actually feel more of that fear. Again, within boundaries that are useful for you and appropriate for you, is just kind of feel what happens if you imagine that fear is being activated. Like maybe the fear, I'm overdoing it and I'm feeling my body not liking that. If go back to the one from before. But just hold your breath and watch what happens to your body in response to your fear. And for most of us, it starts to make the fear amplified and more difficult. Just notice for yourself what comes up for you if you hold your breath. And then what I'd like you to do is I'd like you just to imagine the object or the word in your hand. And I'm going to invite you just to breathe into it fully. And by that, I mean a very relaxed sort of breathing with no effort, maybe a softening of the breath. Maybe it's a sighing of it. And just notice what happens to both your image in your hand, but also to your hand. Does your hand feel something differently than it felt when you were holding your breath? What happens to your body when you allow yourself to breathe into whatever's in your hand? So if I pick an example for myself, one of the things I love about standing in those tall tree stumps, when it could be like 30, 40 feet in the air, is you get an amazing view you don't otherwise get. That brings me great joy. So if I stop and pay attention to that by continuing to breathe and not panic, then I actually get a treat. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you if you'd like either to speak up, just raise your hand or put up the virtual hand and Karen can call on you, or put in the chat box, what did you notice about your breath and your fear? What did that bring up for you?
Sharon, if you'd like to share what you shared in the chat, it would be lovely.
Sure. I was just noticing that when you said to bring an experience, something you're afraid of, I, immediately was able to bring something to mind that I'm quite afraid of. And the whole experience is there, with the stomach anxiousness, the whole embodied experience is there. But then when you said to place it in my hand, like with a word or an abstraction of some sort, it was just gone, like completely inaccessible. And then, I let that go and put myself back into the experience imaginally, then the whole thing was right back again. It was weird.
And were you able to use your breath even in your imagination?
No, it wasn't. I didn't even get to the breath part. It was interesting to
So you
be in that
noticing
like embodied versus abstracted kind of thing. So
all right.
Sandra.
Thank you, Karen. When I saw the fear, I held my breath, choking, and I could feel myself being smothered. But letting it go, my hands are relaxed, my breathing is shallow, but longer, and I just feel more calm, but just more alive.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else care to share? Oh, Robert.
Thank you, David. That was very instructive. I took the notion of fear as a kind of default mechanism that it shows up lots of different ways at different times. For lots of different things. For me, it's an old habit. It's held me back in many things over my life, and I held just the word fear, just as not the word. It's the kind of like almost like a golf ball or some kind of sphere holding in a hand. And as you said, not to make it a brick, but have it sort of be light. And as I focused on it and thought of all the inadequacies and all the lack that I had that caused me this fear, and the circumstances that seemed insurmountable, etc., that the golf ball darkened and got larger and heavier. Feel it increased in weight in my imagination. And then the breath was interesting. I have pretty good breath control, but so I didn't really notice discomfort from the held breath. Just kind of, it was some effort to hold it in, but not like painful or anything. But I lost focus on my breath. I was totally focused on all the implications of the fear and how it occurred for me and how it looked and felt, etc. And when you issued the instruction to breathe into it, it just kind of went, disappeared, vanished. And my hand opened naturally and got lighter. That weight and that closure of holding on to the fear just disappeared. And it was like, okay, that's nice, that's gone, now what? Ready for the next thing.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you. All right. So I'd like to sort of introduce this next big piece. I'm going to shrink this so I can see it better. But so for those of you who not to take a narrative coaching, this is sort of a simpler version of the model. Just really quickly, it's a 4-phase sort of process of change that we use as a backdrop in the narrative coaching process. We just start with what is and move all the way around through what if, which is often creating experiences for people that give them a taste of what's possible and in themselves. And then what matters is some experiments around how to bring that to life in ways that matter to them. And then kind of moving back up into their life with what actually worked in your practices that you might want to take into the rest of your life. So we're going to use that as kind of a frame for what I want, my main piece about fear. And it ties back to thresholds, it ties back to our topic from last month about stillness, is that oftentimes fears take us away from the present moment, and they often heighten certain sensations we have. And a lot of the value of stillness is actually allowing ourselves to just be with actually what is, and to have, as Sandra was saying, a more sense of calm. So part of this is the reason that we don't move through this spiral enough sometimes to be with our fear, is that in the very beginning, around what is often is a fear of acceptance, which is a sort of a way of saying, I don't believe I'll be able to stand it. I won't be able to be in what is. It's too much. It's too not right. It's too whatever. And so I can't accept it. And you see this a lot, for any of us, who've lived long enough, we've experienced the loss of loved ones or friends, and it's, somebody, we hear this news and you can't accept it all. And so we kind of push it away until we kind of begin to absorb the reality of it. But fears that continue in our mind are often ones that, and the fear of hurting yourself or exercising would be a great example, is that to be with that fear and to accept that reality is, in part, we avoid that. Any of us avoid those kind of things because we're not sure we could stand being in it or present to it. And so we tend to want to push off the fear and not deal with it. And the reason we often then don't move on is then because if I have to accept this and be in it, it's going to bring up things I might feel or become aware of that I don't think I can manage. So therefore, I'm going to stay up even in the first phase because I don't want to feel those things. And so a lot of what we're doing, as you'll see in a few minutes, is helping people to figure out what is the spiral, which will be the piece you'll get to practice with, that will allow them to start to step into some of these phases and not sort of shut down before they even begin and succumb to their fear and not take that first step. And so part of why I don't want to become aware of something is not only because I have fear that I won't be able to manage all of that I feel, but then I might have to then do something about it. And it's going to call me, it's going to ask me to do something. And the fear is, there's not the fear of the action itself. Again, I know how to walk down, I know how to walk backwards. I know how to lean. I know how to balance and coordinate myself. There's no action in that whole repelling activity that generates any fear in me whatsoever. But you put me on a tree, the side of a tree, 30 feet in the air with my daughter and everybody else watching me, then the fear is really not the action itself, is my fear is I won't be able to do this. And so then it becomes a greater fear than it actually really is. And then lastly, the final fear, which is really the ultimate fear behind most fears, is what comes up in the last piece, is fear of accountability. Like, it's often, I won't be able to do this well or well enough, and something bad's going to happen. And the accountability is, and therefore I can't control the outcome, or I can't guarantee it's going to work, or you can't assure me that nothing could possibly go wrong. And so for me, what happens is, because it's hard for people to even start on that journey, because each step activates the next one, which just keeps you in this endless loop of fear. And so part of what we're trying to do in all of our work and is to be able to say, but could we make this spiral bite-sized enough where it doesn't activate the entire fear, but gives them some things to do, like they do often now in therapies around phobias, which is sort of the desensitizing folks to be able to accept more and more of the fear. Because for many things that are not legitimately fear-inducing, the fear lives in our imagination. If it lives in our imagination, then we have a modicum of control over our imagination. It's just learning to breathe through and be with the fear as we're taking steps. So what we're going to do is and I was laughing with Karen. So some of you may be afraid, oh, we're not going to do this right. So this will be your practice for fear. But so this is not a test. So, but it's you've all just seen this for the first time 5 minutes ago. So it's just a frame for you to begin to think about what this approach to fear might be like for you. So what we're going to do in a couple of minutes, after I explain the activity, is to put you into some small groups of 2 or preferably 3 people as much as possible. And we'll give you about, let's see, I'm thinking we'll give you about 30 minutes. So you have chances for everybody to practice this. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're the person that is going to be speaking and has a fear, I'd like to have one other person can act sort of as your guide, your support, your coach, whatever. And I'd like you, if you're playing that role, to ask the person who's sharing their fear, what are they afraid is going to happen? Or and just to accept exactly whatever that is. And what you're trying to do is to help them move through this series of questions to begin to sort of get a sense of, is there something they could address about their fear in this moment that might help them make progress on what moving through the fear. So the question for the first threshold is, what can they accept in this moment in time? And it may even just be to name the fear out loud. That may be all they can do, and that's just fine. There's no contest for bravery. Everything that they do is totally fine. And the whole point of the practice is for them to make some progress and for you to practice what it's like to gauge what somebody is ready for. And so when they have a sense of, and you can ask them, so what about this could you accept right now? What is something that's manageable for you? So then what does that allow them to be aware of in the moment? If that's possible, what can they be aware of? So in my case, I might say, I'm aware of looking silly in front of my daughter. Is that really a fear? No, but it's something that comes into my mind. So I can be aware of that part of the fear, and then I can evaluate that and look at that. And then you're looking at this third threshold, which is kind of like moving through the fear to kind of look at how you take that into your life. So what could they do in the moment, even if the overall thing that they're afraid of is bigger? Again, there's no prize for the biggest spiral, but a very tiny spiral can be just fine as well. So what could they do in this moment in time, based on what they're willing to accept and be with and what they're willing to be aware of? What could they do right now? And obviously we can't really act everything out, but maybe they can do that, or maybe it's just in the form of words. And then the last piece in terms of bringing this back into themselves is, what can they be accountable for in this moment? So it might be like a promise to themselves. It might be a recognition that maybe I'm worried too much about what others think. And in this particular instance, I can be accountable for what I think of myself. And maybe that's all I can do right now, is to be accountable to myself. So again, I want you just to invite you to take this and hopefully this has been clear. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, but really it's just a chance for you to explore of how could you begin to understand in a new way the role of this fear and what it wants from you and what it's asking of you to pay attention to in yourself. So maybe you're somebody that's often thought and worried a lot about what other people think of you. And so maybe this fear is inviting you to say, well, what if you could think of yourself as more? What if you could soften the grip you think others have on you, or their perspectives on you? And again, I'd rather you just have a taste of what this might be like as you first try it, rather than having to make monumental leaps. Again, the value of this is smaller things done more often have far more impact than giant aha moments or giant lurches of change. So it's just a chance to explore, how could you engage fear differently? And then how can you support somebody by helping to gauge what are they actually ready to address about their fear? So I'm going to stop there. And if you'd like to kind of have some help for yourself, you could take a screenshot of with your phone or whatever, if you want to have that with you. As a guide for your practice. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to ask Karen if there's anything in the chat box we need to address, or anybody that wants to ask a question.
So far, just a little administrative piece for the chats, the breakouts.
Okay.
Betty and Manjeet, you'll be in a group of 2, and Cheryl and Lori Arendt will be in a group of 2 as well. And Helen's just got to step away for a bit.
Okay.
So, other than
And-
that, I see no questions about the exercise.
Okay. And if you want to join a group, Karen, you can do that as well.
Okay.
All right.
We'll figure that. All right.
Well, have fun, folks. And I wish you well on your adventure. And I look forward to hearing where you end up.
Okay. See you soon.
All right.
That was fun.
There we go.
That was real fun.
Good.
Yay, that's the idea.
Yeah, we'll wait for everybody to come back around here. Wonderful. So as we come back into the room, as often, just really encourage you to put anything in the chat box that you'd like to that emerge for you. If you want to speak about your experience and what unfolded for you, that would be great, either as a listener or as a speaker. Yeah, what did you discover about yourself and fear? And now it's activating everybody's fear of going first. All right.
Rosalind, I wish you weren't on mute. Your laughter was great right there. Cheryl says fear is related to self-control.
Yeah.
Many layers, says Francis. Yes, Laurel.
So I'm the one that is afraid of exercising.
Okay.
And I have gotten injured doing exercises many times. And so I finally started doing it again, really low level, and just inside. And it was going fine for like 2 weeks. And then I stood too long while I was preparing food, and bam, I re-injured my ankle. It's been 2 weeks now and it's still painful. So it's really, and I've had it MRI'd and been to PT, and nobody can explain it to me. It's just, so I tried going around this, but I really struggled because maybe I just accept this extremely injured ankle that doesn't want to heal. I don't know, because I don't want that for my life. I want to take walks.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And do you notice any patterns in when you re-injure yourself?
Any patterns when I re-injure myself? Well, if I'm not paying exquisite attention to how I use my body, that's when I re-injure myself.
Okay.
I was listening to a recording when it happened. So I was listening to the recording instead of paying attention. Oh, it's starting to hurt. Got to sit down now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I notice it before it actually starts to hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the fear is an invitation to pay attention in a new way. As you know, some of you know, I've been quite sick since January, and about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I stopped talking to my doctors because they were adding no value to my journey, other than assuring me that I wasn't dying or anything horrible. But I started to just sort of treat it as an initiation. and saying, what is this illness or this, whatever this is, what is this inviting me to notice that I wasn't paying attention to? And once I started to reframe the experience, I started getting better. And I do take things that help my immune system, but the reframe, not that that's always the case, sometimes medicine can be extraordinarily helpful. But now the medicine that I am partaking in is of my choice with just a couple of providers, but it's all within a different, completely different frame about what's happening and what this is, and therefore what it needs. And so part of my query for you, Laurel, is I think one of the things that fear does is it really helps us to clarify values. It helps us to kind of really hone in on what are we being asked, where's our edge to grow. Yeah, and part of that's just an invitation to even reframe the fear, and for which breath is essential.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I wish you and your ankle well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other people want to share or have shared in the box, Karen.
Mhm. Well, both Martin and Francis, in different ways, have talked about trusting the process. And I'm wondering if there's something they'd like to bring into the room about that.
And they're even next to each other on my screen from across the ocean. Yeah.
Robert, we'll call on you in a minute if we can hear from either, if Francis and Martin want to share on that. Thank you.
I've never known either of them to be shy, so hopefully one of them will share.
Well, it was a really big fear, not a little thing. And so trusting the process, which I found really nuanced, was actually incredibly powerful. So to go really, 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 really gently through something really, really, really big and, potentially you could get lost in, and just look to peel back a little tiny bit of it, raised the importance of the questions that are at the heart of this, which is, what is this inviting you to pay attention to? So Martin, his elegance and compassion and the gentle and slow way that he enabled the process to unfold was really much more powerful than if we'd been trying to achieve things. And back to your conversation about goals, and it reminds me of how far I've come with this in the last 10 years or whatever, which is great. And it reminds me also of the power of trusting the people that you're working with completely. Giving yourself to the process is in itself quite healing, as well as revealing.
Yeah. I think that's an important piece, Francis, about choosing our allies carefully. In any professional that we seek to help us, for example, they're going to have a reasonably similar amount of knowledge and reasonably similar kind of experience. But I just really look for, do I trust this person with my life, with my being? And do I see them as an ally who's going to walk alongside me, or somebody's going to stand over there and lecture me or scribble things on a pad? And there's a discernment that comes about those who were worthy of helping us with our fear.
Yeah, and how we show up to that. So I'm naturally shy, mostly introverted, and chose to reveal something quite profound. So I really to put my trust in, and that's a choice for me. Choosing to be in a trusting half an hour was a big part of what helped this to be so revealing and healing. And Martin was
Okay,
amazing.
thank you.
And Liam's feedback was also nuanced,
Hmm.
important, and another more layers of revelation.
Hmm.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Martin or Liam, do you want to chime in?
So I found myself with a client or a coachee who had a very big problem to share, and the thing that leapt out at me was, how do I create the safety for us to do anything with this? So I really focused on that safe space at the start of it.
And what was that like for you?
Once we started to build the safety, it was fine. It started to feel that we could work in that way, and that we could make some progress. You couldn't actually turn it around, because in one sense I was creating some safety for me as well.
Oh, yeah. How so? Would you care to share some more about that?
Just so the process starts with creating that safe space to work from, and I think for a coach who's relatively inexperienced in this area, you need some safety for you as well. You need to create that safe space as well.
Indeed. And Liam, anything you want to add as an observer to that process?
So picking up on what Martin was just saying, the care that Martin showed for creating that safe space and checking in and acknowledging, Francis had mentioned it wasn't the small thing, and it wasn't the small thing. And I think acknowledging the sort of size of it and the need to create that kind of that sense of safety, and so as an observer as well, it felt safe. I was maybe paying a different kind of attention to fear, and the fears that maybe it was stimulating in me, but I found the experience of listening over time was not a fearful experience.
Yeah. And does this little piece here, does that bring up anything for anyone else they want to share before we move on to hear from Robert again? Anything?
David, I'll just contribute that before the session, we were talking about the phrase fertile safety. And hearing them talk, really, that just captures it so beautifully.
Yeah, sometimes our fears can feel quite jarring, but actually there's a tenderness that they're wanting in a way to kind of hold them lightly, and yeah. All right, Robert, do you still want to share?
Always. I'll try to be as brief as I can. I'd go on too long, I know. There's if I survive until June 11th, which I have high hopes of, I'll be in 12-step recovery from drug addiction for 36 years. I was a drug addict for 20 years. And one of the things that gets passed around in the meetings is trust the process. That is 12-step wisdom of a deep sort. There's a lot of, we kind of sift through our own experiences and share what seems true for us. And more often than not, if we're speaking from the heart, that is true for other people as well, sometimes unanimously. And so when I shared in the chat initially, because we missed it, after 4 years of trying to be a narrative coach, of taking the course in 2019, and then trying to get going with that as a career, after failing at many different careers throughout my life, I just finished last Sunday. I finished the first round of my first client. And contrary to my previous experience in working of effort and struggle and constant anxiety and not doing it right and getting fired or just being mediocre, it was easy and fun. And he got such great value that he already is committed to continuing on. He wants to take a month off, which I fully intend to send him homework and reminders and whatnot, but I'm going to mainly leave him alone for a month. And then in a month, we'll start up again with a whole new conversation. And it was such easy fun. This is work I've been preparing for my entire life. So when I actually got to do it, the fact that I had not been a diligent student was irrelevant. That I followed the 4-step process of the 4 S's of, we know the 4 S's, I don't need to go that it just worked. It happened. It was, I allowed it to happen. I trusted that he would encounter his own high intelligence, his own drive to success. He's a very high achieving New York retinologist. He's like at the top of his field in eye surgery. You don't get better in eye surgery than a retinologist. So he's like, he doesn't have to worry about his job. He was worried about his job because it was hurting his back. He had persistent back trouble, and physical therapy had not been effective. And we got to the root of some of his psychological problems, or at least opened up some space for him to be less concerned about it and trust the process, basically.
Great.
And it was such a blessing. It was so incredible. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you. And I'm happy for you, Robert. All right. So we just have a couple of minutes. I'm just going to put up one final slide just because it's got a little invitation on it for you. So just the invitation for the week around this fear or any others, to allow yourself to stay with the fear in moments when you're being challenged to learn and or grow. And part of it is sort of, like I said, there's sort of this fierce tenderness or this fierce humility with which we engage our fears, to just, there's a bit of compassion and candor, but really just an invitation just to sit with them when they arise in the next few weeks and see what emerges for you. There's a link here. Karen has put, or will put it in the chat box. If you want to post, we've got a forum just for BCE participants. If you want to post anything that came up for you or you discovered or realized in that process, you're always welcome to post that in our forum for the rest of the folks. But otherwise, I just want to thank you for your time. It's always wonderful. I really enjoy these sessions. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one. All right. Oh, good. Just loving reading all the things coming in the chat as people starting.
Thank you, Manjeet, for your final comment there.
Yeah, great.
Good to see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Be well.
Till next month.